Sarah Martinez had never held a gun before stepping onto the military training facility grounds that humid Tuesday morning in July. The 24-year-old college graduate from Portland stood among 47 other recruits, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the imposing figure of Chief Petty Officer Jake "Razor" Thompson walk across the shooting range. The Navy SEAL instructor moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent 15 years mastering every aspect of combat. His weathered face bore the marks of countless missions in hostile territories, and his steel-gray eyes seemed to assess every recruit with surgical accuracy. When those eyes landed on Sarah, she felt exposed, as if he could see right through her carefully constructed facade of confidence. Sarah had joined the military police training program after her younger brother Michael was killed in Afghanistan. The police officer who delivered the devastating news had mentioned that Michael died because his unit lacked proper defensive training. That single comment had burned itself into Sarah's mind, driving her to enlist despite having no military background whatsoever. The shooting range stretched out before them like a concrete wasteland, marked by numbered lanes and dotted with human-shaped targets at varying distances. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air from the previous group's training session. Sarah's stomach churned as she realized that in a few minutes, she would be expected to hit those distant targets with deadly accuracy. Chief Thompson's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Listen up, recruits. Today we separate those who have what it takes from those who are wasting everyone's time. You will fire 30 rounds at targets positioned at 50, 75, and 100 yards. Military police officers need to be marksmen, not pray amateurs." As the recruits were assigned their lanes, Sarah found herself in lane 12, directly in Thompson's line of sight. She picked up the standard-issue M9 pistol, surprised by its weight. The metal felt cold and alien in her palms. Around her, other recruits handled their weapons with varying degrees of familiarity. Some, like Marcus Webb from Texas, moved with the confidence of someone who had been hunting since childhood. Others, like herself, clearly struggled with the basic mechanics of the firearm. Thompson appeared beside her lane without warning, his presence so sudden that Sarah nearly dropped her weapon. "First time, Martinez?" His voice carried no mockery, just a clinical assessment. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Your brother served with distinction in the 82nd Airborne," Thompson said quietly, so only she could hear. "He died covering his squad's retreat. That kind of courage doesn't necessarily translate to marksmanship, but it tells me something about your character." Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't expected anyone here to know about Michael, let alone speak of his sacrifice with such respect. The revelation that this hardened instructor had taken the time to research her background both surprised and unsettled her. "Today's not about being perfect," Thompson continued, checking the safety mechanism on her pistol with practiced efficiency. "It's about learning what you're made of when everything's working against you." The first round of firing began with targets at 50 yards. Sarah assumed the proper stance she had learned in the brief classroom instruction, feet shoulder-width apart, dominant hand gripping the pistol firmly, support hand wrapped around it, arms extended. She aligned the front and rear sights with the target's center mass, held her breath, and squeezed the trigger slowly. The gun's recoil surprised her, sending the barrel jerking upward. When the smoke cleared and she looked downrange, her target remained unmarked. Not even close. The shot had gone completely wide, hitting the dirt embankment behind the targets. Around her, the crack of gunfire continued as other recruits found their marks. She could hear Thompson calling out scores. Webb, 8 out of 10 in the black. Richardson, 7 out of 10. Solid work. But when he reached her lane, silence. Sarah's second shot went high, sailing over the target entirely. Her third shot hit the wooden frame surrounding the target, sending splinters flying. With each miss, her frustration mounted. Her hands began to shake, making accurate aiming nearly impossible. The more she missed, the more tense she became, creating a vicious cycle of failure. "Martinez, stop firing," Thompson's voice commanded from behind her. She lowered her weapon, her face burning with embarrassment. Several other recruits had paused their own shooting to watch her struggle. Thompson moved to her side again, but this time he didn't offer encouragement. Instead, he studied her stance and grip with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. You're fighting the weapon instead of working with it. The gun's not your enemy. Your own tension is. I don't understand, sir, Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible over the continuing gunfire from other lanes. Watch Webb in lane 15, Thompson instructed. Sarah looked over to see Marcus firing with smooth, controlled movements. Each shot was deliberate, relaxed. He's not forcing anything. The gun becomes an extension of his body, not a foreign object he's wrestling with. Sarah tried to implement Thompson's observation, but her next 5 shots continued to miss the target entirely. By now, she had attracted the attention of several other instructors, who gathered near Thompson to observe the spectacular display of poor marksmanship. Their whispered conversations and head shaking only intensified her anxiety. Maybe she's just not cut out for this, she heard one instructor mutter to another. Some people have natural ability, others don't. Thompson's jaw tightened at the comment, but he said nothing. Instead, he positioned himself directly behind Sarah, close enough that she could feel his presence without him physically interfering with her shooting stance. Tell me about your brother, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise of the range. The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. Sir, Michael, tell me what kind of person he was. Sarah lowered her pistol slightly, confused by the direction of the conversation. He was fearless. When we were kids, he would always stand up to bullies, even when they were twice his size. He never backed down from anything that mattered to him. And why did he join the army? To protect people. He said someone had to stand between innocent people and those who would hurt them. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke about her brother's convictions. Load another magazine, Thompson ordered. But this time, don't think about the target. Think about Michael. Think about the people he died protecting. Think about the people you might have to protect someday. Sarah inserted a fresh magazine into her pistol and raised it toward the target. But instead of focusing on the mechanical aspects of shooting, she thought about Michael's last letter home. He had written about a village where children played in streets that had been battlefields just months before. He had written about making a difference, about serving something larger than himself. She squeezed the trigger. Mississippi. But something felt different this time. The shot had gone wide. But her grip felt more natural, her breathing more controlled. Thompson said nothing, simply nodding for her to continue. Shot after shot, Sarah continued to miss the target completely, but with each round fired, she felt incrementally more comfortable with the weapon in her hands. The other recruits had long since finished their first series and moved on to the 75-yard targets. Sarah remained at the 50-yard line, working through her second full magazine without a single hit. As the morning sun climbed higher and the temperature rose, sweat began to bead on Sarah's forehead. Her shoulders ached from maintaining the shooting stance for so long, and her hands had developed a slight tremor from gripping the pistol too tightly. Yet Thompson made no move to advance her to the next distance or end her session. Chief, maybe we should move on, suggested Instructor Wallace, a younger SEAL who had been observing Sarah's progress. She's clearly struggling with the fundamentals. Thompson's response surprised everyone within earshot. She stays on this line until she's ready to move forward. Real combat doesn't operate on a training schedule. The weight of those words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about passing a marksmanship test. This was about proving she belonged here, proving she could honor her brother's memory, proving she could become someone who stood between innocent people and those who would harm them. As she loaded her third magazine, Sarah noticed something she hadn't before. In the brief moments between her shots, when the range fell quiet, she could hear Thompson's breathing. Steady, controlled, rhythmic. Almost without thinking, she began to match her breathing to his. Her next shot missed, but it hit the wooden target frame instead of disappearing into the dirt. Progress, however small. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the shooting range as Sarah began her 4th hour of continuous firing practice. Her shirt was soaked with perspiration, and her arms felt like lead weights, but Chief Thompson had made it clear that she would not advance to the next firing distance until she demonstrated basic competency at 50 yards. While the other recruits had long since moved through all 3 distances and were now cleaning their weapons in the shade, Sarah remained alone in lane 12, methodically working through magazine after magazine. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult part of the ordeal. She could feel the eyes of the other trainees on her, some sympathetic, others impatient to move on to the next phase of training. Thompson had positioned himself at a small table behind the firing line, ostensibly reviewing training reports, but Sarah could sense his constant attention to her every movement. Occasionally, he would call out a brief instruction, control your breathing, or stop anticipating the recoil, but mostly he observed in silence. Sarah's shooting had improved marginally since the morning. She was now consistently hitting the wooden frame that surrounded the targets, and once had even nicked the outer edge of the paper target itself. But she was nowhere near the level of accuracy expected of a military police trainee. Most of the other recruits were grouping their shots within a 6-inch circle at 50 yards. Sarah's shots scattered across a 3-foot area. As she loaded yet another magazine, Sarah noticed a small group of senior instructors gathering near the range office. Their body language suggested they were discussing her performance, and she could guess the nature of their conversation. In military training, there were standards to maintain. Students who couldn't meet basic requirements were typically removed from the program to make room for those who could. The thought of being dismissed from training filled Sarah with a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weapons in her hands. This wasn't just about her own goals anymore. In the months since Michael's death, she had connected with several families who had lost loved ones in military service. She had promised Michael's battle buddy, a young sergeant named Rodriguez, that she would carry on Michael's mission in whatever way she could. Martinez, Thompson called from his table. Take a 15-minute break. Hydrate, and rest your arms. Sarah lowered her weapon gratefully, her hands cramping as she relaxed her grip. She walked to the water station, acutely aware of the conversations that stopped as she passed groups of other recruits. The silence was more painful than any direct criticism would have been. Marcus Webb approached her at the water station, his shooting jacket marked with instructor pins indicating his exceptional performance. "Rough day," he said, not unkindly. "That's an understatement," Sarah replied, accepting a cup of water from him. For what it's worth, Thompson's never spent this much time with someone who was washing out, Marcus observed. Usually, if someone can't hit the broadside of a barn after the first hour, they get reassigned to a different specialty. Sarah looked across the range to where Thompson sat, still reviewing paperwork, but clearly monitoring her break. Maybe he's just being thorough and documenting my failure. Or maybe he sees something the rest of us don't, Marcus suggested. Thompson's got a reputation for identifying potential that isn't immediately obvious. Half the SEALs in his unit were guys other instructors had written off. When Sarah returned to Lane 12 after her break, she found Thompson standing beside her shooting position, holding a different pistol than the standard issue M9 she had been using. This one appeared older, more worn, with custom grips and sights. "This is my personal sidearm," Thompson explained, offering her the weapon. "It's been with me through 3 deployments and more firefights than I care to count. Sometimes a shooter needs to feel connected to their weapon." Sarah accepted the pistol, immediately noticing the difference. The grip fit her hands more naturally, and the weight distribution felt more balanced. The trigger had a smoother pull than the standard issue weapons, and the sights seemed to align more intuitively. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own boldness in questioning a senior instructor. Thompson considered the question carefully before responding. "Because 6 months ago, your brother died protecting a convoy of medical supplies destined for an Afghan village. The mission succeeded because of his actions, and those supplies saved the lives of 37 civilians, including 12 children under the age of 5. Sarah felt her throat constrict with emotion she had been suppressing all day. "Rodriguez wrote to me about Michael's sacrifice," Thompson continued. "He specifically mentioned that Michael had talked about his sister who wanted to serve, but didn't know how. Rodriguez thought I should know if you ever showed up in one of my training programs." The revelation that her brother had spoken about her to his fellow soldiers, and that those soldiers had reached out to help her, was overwhelming. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, not wanting to appear weak in front of the other recruits who were still watching her struggle. "One more thing," Thompson added quietly. "Michael apparently told Rodriguez that you were the most persistent person he'd ever known. He said you once spent 3 months learning to ride a bicycle just because a neighbor kid said girls couldn't do it. He was proud of your stubbornness." With Thompson's pistol in her hands, Her brother's memory burning in her chest, Sarah returned to the firing line. She assumed her stance, aligned her sights with the target, and controlled her breathing just as Thompson had taught her. Her first shot with the new weapon still missed the target, but it hit the wooden frame closer to the center than any of her previous attempts. Encouraged, she fired again. Another miss, but, again, closer to the mark. On her third shot, something clicked. The bullet struck the outer ring of the target, marking her first successful hit after nearly 5 hours of trying. A small cheer went up from some of the watching recruits, quickly silenced by looks from the instructors. Thompson nodded approvingly, but said nothing. The message was clear. One hit didn't constitute success. She needed to prove this wasn't a fluke. Sarah's fourth shot missed completely, sailing wide of the target. The brief moment of confidence evaporated, replaced by the familiar frustration and self-doubt. She had proven she could hit the target once, but could she do it again? Her hands began to shake again as the pressure mounted. Every shot felt like a test not just of her marksmanship, but of her worthiness to honor Michael's memory, to serve alongside people like Rodriguez, to earn her place among these warriors. The fifth shot missed. The sixth shot missed. By the seventh shot, Sarah was fighting back tears of frustration. She had come so close to proving herself, only to fall back into the same pattern of failure that had plagued her all day. "Stop," Thompson commanded from behind her. Sarah lowered the weapon, expecting to be dismissed from the program. Instead, Thompson moved to stand directly beside her, close enough that she could hear his quiet words despite the ambient noise of the range. "Tell me what you're thinking about when you pull that trigger." "I'm thinking about not missing," Sarah admitted. "Wrong answer," Thompson replied firmly. "You're thinking about failure instead of success. You're thinking about the shot you just missed instead of the shot you're about to take." Thompson gestured toward the target downrange. "That target isn't your enemy. It's not judging you or keeping score of your failures. It's just paper and cardboard, waiting for you to put a bullet through it." He paused, then continued in a voice so low only she could hear. "Your brother didn't die thinking about all the ways he might fail to protect his men. He died thinking about the mission, about the people counting on him, about doing what needed to be done." Sarah raised the pistol again, but this time, instead of focusing on the mechanics of shooting or the fear of missing, she thought about Michael's conviction that someone had to stand between innocent people and those who would hurt them. She thought about Rodriguez and the other soldiers who had trusted Michael with their lives. She thought about the village children who were alive because of her brother's sacrifice. The shot rang out across the range, and Sarah watched as the bullet struck the target just outside the center ring. Her second successful hit, and this one was dramatically closer to the bullseye than her first. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah maintained her focus on purpose rather than performance. She hit the target 6 times out of her remaining 15 shots, not outstanding accuracy by any means, but consistent enough to demonstrate that her first successes weren't accidents. As the sun began to set, and the day's training session neared its end, Thompson finally called a halt to Sarah's marathon shooting session. She had fired nearly 200 rounds over the course of 7 hours, an exhausting ordeal that had pushed her to the limits of her physical and mental endurance. "Tomorrow we start at the 75-yard line," Thompson announced, loud enough for all the recruits to hear. "Martinez has earned the right to advance." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but this time it was relief rather than frustration. She had survived her first real test, not with flying colors, but with enough determination to prove she belonged in the program. 3 weeks into the training program, Sarah had established herself as the most improved shooter in her class, though her absolute scores still lagged behind most of her peers. What she lacked in natural talent, she compensated for with relentless practice and an almost obsessive dedication to improvement. Every evening after the formal training day ended, she could be found on the practice range, working through dry fire exercises and studying shooting techniques in the training manuals. Her relationship with Chief Thompson had evolved from that of a struggling student and a demanding instructor to something more complex. He pushed her harder than any other recruit, setting higher standards and refusing to accept the mediocre performance that might have been considered acceptable for someone with her initial skill level. Yet there was an underlying respect in their interactions that hadn't existed during those first desperate hours on the range. On this particular Wednesday morning, the recruits faced their most challenging shooting test yet, the combat simulation exercise. Unlike the static target practice they had been doing, this test required them to engage multiple targets while moving through an obstacle course designed to replicate the stress and confusion of actual combat situations. Sarah stood at the starting line with her squad of 6 recruits, each armed with paint-round pistols that would mark their hits on sensor-equipped targets throughout the course. The obstacles included walls to navigate around, barriers to shoot over, and pop-up targets that appeared at unpredictable intervals. Success required not just accuracy, but speed, tactical thinking, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. This exercise separates the shooters from the soldiers, Instructor Wallace explained to the assembled recruits. Anyone can hit a stationary target from a stable position. Military police officers need to engage threats while under fire, while protecting civilians, and while making split-second decisions about when to shoot and when to hold their fire. Thompson observed from a raised platform that provided him with a clear view of the entire course. Unlike the previous weeks when he had provided constant guidance and encouragement, today he remained silent, allowing each recruit to succeed or fail based on their own preparation and instincts. Marcus Webb's squad went first, completing the course with impressive efficiency. Marcus himself managed to hit 14 of 16 targets while maintaining excellent movement and tactical awareness. The other members of his squad performed similarly well, setting a high standard for the remaining groups. When Sarah's squad was called to the starting line, she felt the familiar flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but it was different from the paralyzing fear she had experienced during her first day on the range. Now the nervousness was mixed with anticipation and a quiet confidence born from weeks of intensive practice. "Remember," called out Rodriguez, the same Rodriguez who had served with her brother, who had been assigned as an assistant instructor for this exercise. "Speed is important, but accuracy is everything. A missed shot in combat doesn't just mean a lower score. It could mean an innocent person dies." The starting signal echoed across the course, and Sarah's squad moved forward in tactical formation. The first target appeared from behind a concrete barrier at 30 yards, a hostile target marked with distinctive red coloring. Sarah acquired the target quickly, aligned her sights, and fired. Hit. As they advanced through the course, targets began appearing more rapidly and from multiple directions. Sarah found herself drawing on not just her marksmanship training, but the tactical movement and decision-making skills they had been learning throughout the program. When a civilian target, marked in blue, appeared next to a hostile target, she had to make the split-second decision to hold her fire until she had a clear shot that wouldn't endanger the innocent bystander. Midway through the course, Sarah's squad encountered their most challenging scenario, a narrow alley between 2 buildings where targets appeared simultaneously from windows above and doorways on either side. The confined space meant that the squad members had to coordinate their movements carefully to avoid interfering with each other's shooting lanes. Sarah found herself assigned to cover the right side of the alley, while her squadmate Thompson covered the left. As they advanced, targets began popping up in rapid succession. Sarah engaged a hostile target at 25 yards, missed her first shot, but connected with her second. Almost immediately, another target appeared from a different window. This time, she hit with her first shot. But then, something unexpected happened. A target appeared that was unlike any they had encountered in their training exercises. It was a child-sized figure, but instead of the blue marking that designated civilians, it carried the red marking of a hostile target. The scenario was designed to test the recruit's ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, a child soldier situation that unfortunately reflected real-world combat scenarios. Several of the recruits hesitated, unsure how to respond to this ethically complex target. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah heard Thompson's voice from weeks earlier. Military police officers need to be prepared for situations where there are no good choices, only necessary ones. Sarah engaged the target with 2 quick shots, both hits. The decision felt wrong on an emotional level, but she understood that in the context of the exercise, hesitation could have meant the deaths of her squad mates or innocent civilians. As her squad completed the course, Sarah realized that she had hit 12 of 15 targets, not the highest score in the class, but respectable for someone who had struggled so dramatically just 3 weeks earlier. More importantly, she had maintained her composure throughout the exercise, making tactical decisions quickly and effectively. But the real test came during the debrief session that followed the exercise. Each recruit was required to explain their decision-making process, particularly regarding the more challenging scenarios they had encountered. When it was Sarah's turn to discuss the child soldier scenario, she stood before the assembled instructors and recruits with her heart pounding. The target was marked as hostile, which in the context of this exercise meant it represented a threat to civilian lives and to my squad, she began. While engaging such a target would be emotionally devastating in a real-world situation, failing to engage would have potentially resulted in greater casualties. Thompson nodded approvingly, but then posed a follow-up question that caught her off guard. And if you had encountered that same scenario in a real-world situation where the target markings were ambiguous, how would you make that decision with incomplete information? The question struck at the heart of what military police officers faced in combat zones, situations where split-second decisions had to be made with imperfect information and where the consequences of both action and inaction could be catastrophic. Sarah thought for a long moment before responding. I would have to make the best decision I could based on the immediate threat assessment and the potential for civilian casualties. If the threat appeared imminent and the potential for collateral damage from inaction was high, I would engage. But I would have to live with the consequences of that decision for the rest of my life. And if you made the wrong choice? Thompson pressed. Then I would have to live with that too, Sarah replied quietly. But my brother died because someone had to make hard choices under impossible circumstances. I can't honor his memory by avoiding those same choices when they become my responsibility. The room fell silent for several seconds. Then Thompson stepped forward and addressed not just Sarah, but the entire group of recruits. That answer demonstrates the kind of moral clarity and personal responsibility that we need in military police officers. It's not about being comfortable with difficult decisions. It's about being willing to make them when they need to be made. After the debrief, as the recruits were dismissed for the day, Thompson approached Sarah privately. "Walk with me," he said, leading her away from the group toward a quiet area near the administration building. "You know that child soldier scenario isn't just theoretical," Thompson said as they walked. "I've had to make that decision in real life. Twice." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the weight of Thompson's revelation sank in. "The first time, I hesitated," Thompson continued. "It cost the life of one of my teammates. The second time, I didn't hesitate. It saved lives, but I still wake up some nights thinking about it." They walked in silence for several minutes before Thompson spoke again. "Your brother wrote to Rodriguez about you more than you know. He said you had a strong moral compass, but that you weren't naive about the complexities of right and wrong. Today proved he was right." "I don't feel right about it," Sarah admitted, "even knowing it was just an exercise." "Good," Thompson replied firmly. "The day it feels right is the day you need to find a different profession. The weight of these decisions is what keeps us human." As they reached the administration building, Thompson turned to face Sarah directly. "Tomorrow we move to the final phase of marksmanship training, long-range precision shooting, and night operations. It's where we find out who has what it takes to graduate from this program." Sarah nodded, understanding that despite her progress, the ultimate test still lay ahead. She had proven she could hit targets at short to medium range, and she had demonstrated tactical decision-making under pressure. But the final phase would require a level of precision and mental fortitude that would push every recruit to their absolute limits. That night, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's challenges, she thought about the child soldier scenario and Thompson's revelation about his own experiences. The weight of potential future responsibilities pressed down on her, but rather than feeling overwhelmed, she felt a sense of clarity about her purpose. She was no longer training just to honor her brother's memory or to prove herself to the instructors. She was training to become someone who could make the hard decisions that protected innocent lives, even when those decisions came at a personal cost. The girl who had never held a gun 3 weeks earlier was transforming into someone who understood the grave responsibility that came with the authority to use deadly force. The final week of marksmanship training arrived with an ominous weather forecast. 3 days of intermittent rain, and wind that would make long-range shooting exponentially more difficult. Sarah stood on the 200-yard range at dawn, watching the gray clouds gather overhead, while Chief Thompson and the other instructors set up the most challenging targets the recruits had yet faced. Unlike the static paper targets they had been using, these targets were three-dimensional mannequins designed to simulate human-sized threats at distance. Some were positioned behind partial cover, requiring precise shot placement to neutralize without hitting civilian mannequins positioned nearby. Others were placed at angles that made traditional center mass shots impossible, demanding that the recruits adapt their aim points based on ballistics and anatomy. Sarah's performance over the past month had been steady but unspectacular. She consistently scored in the middle of her class, good enough to remain in the program, but not outstanding enough to distinguish herself among her peers. As she prepared for what Thompson had described as the ultimate test of a military police officer's shooting ability, she knew that mediocrity would not be sufficient. The qualification standard was demanding. Recruits needed to hit at least 15 of 20 targets at 200 yards, with at least 5 of those hits being precision shots to specific target zones that would simulate disabling rather than lethal force. Additionally, they would be required to engage the targets within strict time limits while wearing full combat gear and under simulated stress conditions. Marcus Webb, who had dominated every previous shooting exercise, approached the firing line first. Despite his obvious skill and confidence, the combination of distance, wind, and target complexity proved challenging even for him. Of his 20 shots, he managed 14 hits, with 6 precision shots, just 1 hit short of the qualification standard on his first attempt. As other recruits took their turns, it became clear that the test was living up to Thompson's reputation for being uncompromisingly difficult. Of the first 12 recruits to attempt qualification, only 3 achieved passing scores on their first try. Most would get additional chances over the remaining training days, but the pressure was mounting as word spread through the group about the test's difficulty. When Sarah's name was called, she felt a familiar combination of nervousness and determination. Over the weeks of training, she had learned to channel her anxiety into focused energy rather than allowing it to overwhelm her performance. She checked her equipment one final time. Thompson's personal pistol, which he had continued to allow her to use for major tests, extra magazines loaded with precision ammunition, and the electronic hearing protection that would allow her to communicate with the instructors during the exercise. Martinez, Thompson called as she assumed her position at the firing line. Remember that at this distance, everything is amplified. A slight tremor in your hands becomes a significant miss. Poor trigger control sends your shot wide by feet rather than inches. But the fundamentals remain the same: sight alignment, breath control, smooth trigger press. Sarah nodded, understanding that Thompson's advice was as much about mental preparation as technical instruction. She had seen other recruits overthink the challenge, becoming so focused on the distance and difficulty that they abandoned the basic techniques that had brought them success at shorter ranges. The wind had picked up as the morning progressed, adding an additional variable to an already complex shooting problem. Sarah would need to estimate the wind's effect on her bullets and adjust her aim accordingly, a skill that came naturally to experienced marksmen but required intense concentration for someone at her skill level. Her first target was a standard threat mannequin at 200 yards with no complicating factors. Sarah settled into her shooting stance, controlled her breathing, and aligned her sights carefully. The shot broke cleanly, and she watched through her scope as the bullet struck the target's center mass. A solid start. The second target proved more challenging. A threat mannequin positioned behind partial cover with a civilian mannequin just inches away. Sarah had to aim for a narrow, exposed section of the threat target while ensuring her shot wouldn't endanger the innocent bystander if she missed slightly. She took her time, double-checking her sight picture before firing. Hit. As she progressed through the course of fire, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Each target presented a unique problem that required both technical skill and tactical thinking. She missed her fourth shot, a difficult angle shot that required her to account for both wind and the target's position relative to her firing point. But she regained her composure quickly and connected with her fifth shot. By the halfway point, Sarah had hit 9 of 10 targets, putting her on pace for qualification but with no margin for error on the remaining 10 shots. The targets in the second half of the course were positioned at the most challenging angles and behind the most restrictive cover, designed to test the absolute limits of the recruit's abilities. Shot 11 was another miss. This one on a target that required a precision shot to simulate disabling rather than lethal force. Sarah had aimed for the target's shoulder area but misjudged the wind effect, sending her bullet wide of the mark. She now needed to hit 9 of the remaining 9 shots to achieve qualification, a margin for error that had essentially disappeared. Thompson, who had been observing from the tower, descended to the firing line and positioned himself near Sarah's shooting position. His presence was both encouraging and intimidating, a reminder that he believed in her ability, but also that he was personally invested in her success. "Talk to me about what you're seeing," Thompson said quietly as Sarah prepared for her 12th shot. "The wind has shifted direction slightly," Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the target. "It's coming more from the left now, which means I need to adjust my aim point to compensate." "What else?" Sarah studied the target more carefully. "The angle of this target means that a center mass shot might not be effective. I need to aim higher and to the right to ensure a clean hit." "Trust your analysis," Thompson said simply. Sarah's 12th shot struck the target cleanly, exactly where she had intended. For the next 6 shots, she maintained her focus and precision, hitting each target with the kind of accuracy that surprised even her. As she prepared for her 19th shot, a precision shot to a target partially obscured by a civilian mannequin, she realized that she had achieved something she hadn't thought possible just weeks earlier. The 19th shot required her to thread the bullet through a gap barely larger than the bullet itself, accounting for wind, distance, and angle. Sarah had never attempted such a difficult shot under qualification conditions. She settled into her position, controlled her breathing, and trusted in the thousands of practice repetitions that had brought her to this moment. The shot broke perfectly, and through her scope, Sarah watched as the bullet struck exactly where she had aimed. 18 hits out of 19 shots, with only the final shot remaining to complete her qualification. The 20th and final target was positioned at the maximum range and presented the most challenging shot of the entire course. A precision shot to a target positioned at such an angle that only a small section was visible to the shooter. It was the kind of shot that separated good marksmen from exceptional ones. As Sarah prepared for her final shot, she became aware that the entire range had fallen silent. Other recruits, instructors, and support personnel had stopped their activities to watch her attempt to complete what had begun as the most unlikely qualification of the training cycle. Sarah thought about Michael, about Rodriguez, about the village children who were alive because of her brother's sacrifice. She thought about the weight of responsibility that came with the badge and weapon of a military police officer. Most importantly, she thought about the person she had become over the past month, someone who could be trusted to make difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. The final shot rang out across the range, and Sarah watched as the bullet struck the target precisely where she had aimed. 20 shots, 19 hits, including the required precision shots. Not only had she qualified, but she had posted one of the highest scores of the entire training cycle. As Sarah cleared her weapon and stepped back from the firing line, Thompson approached with an expression that mixed pride, surprise, and something that might have been vindication. "Outstanding shooting, Martinez," he said formally. Then, more quietly, he added, "Your brother would be proud." The other recruits crowded around Sarah, offering congratulations and expressing amazement at her transformation from the struggling beginner who had missed every shot on her first day. But Sarah's attention was focused on Thompson, who had invested so much time and effort in her development. "Thank you," she said simply, understanding that no amount of words could adequately express her gratitude for everything he had done to help her succeed. "Don't thank me yet," Thompson replied with a slight smile. "You still have one more test to pass." Sarah's heart sank slightly. She had assumed that qualifying on the long-range course meant she had completed all the marksmanship requirements. "What test?" Thompson gestured toward a section of the range that had been cordoned off throughout their training. "Night operations. Tomorrow night. You and the other qualified shooters will engage targets in complete darkness, using only night vision equipment and tactical lights. It's where we find out who can perform when they can't see their targets clearly. As the implications of Thompson's words sank in, Sarah realized that despite her success today, the ultimate challenge still lay ahead. Everything she had learned, every skill she had developed, would be tested under conditions that eliminated many of the visual cues she had relied upon. But, for the first time since beginning the program, Sarah felt genuinely confident in her ability to meet whatever challenge awaited her. She had proven to herself and to others that determination and proper training could overcome initial limitations. Tomorrow's test would be difficult, but she was no longer the same person who had missed every shot on her first day. The night operations test began at 2,300 hours on a moonless Thursday evening. Sarah stood in the equipment shed, adjusting her night vision goggles and checking her tactical light for the third time. The familiar weight of Thompson's pistol rested in her holster, but tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the darkness had added weight to both the weapon and the responsibility it represented. 23 recruits had qualified for the night operations test, representing the survivors of an original class of 48. Those who passed tonight would graduate from the military police training program and receive their first duty assignments. Those who failed would be recycled to repeat portions of their training or, in severe cases, reassigned to different military specialties altogether. Chief Thompson stood before the assembled group, his own night vision equipment giving him an alien appearance in the dim red lighting of the shed. Gentlemen and ladies, tonight you will face the most challenging conditions a military police officer can encounter, engaging threats in complete darkness while protecting civilian lives. He gestured toward a detailed map of the training facility. The course includes 12 engagement areas spread across half a mile of varied terrain. You will encounter hostile targets, civilian targets that must not be engaged, and ambiguous targets that require split-second identification and decision-making. Some targets will be stationary, others will be moving, and some will only be visible for seconds at a time. Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes, potential cover positions, and areas where civilian targets might be positioned near hostile ones. The complexity was overwhelming, but she forced herself to focus on the fundamental skills that had brought her this far. Additionally, Thompson continued, you will be operating under simulated stress conditions. Speakers positioned throughout the course will broadcast sounds of gunfire, explosions, and civilian casualties designed to create auditory confusion and psychological pressure. Your ability to maintain situational awareness and make accurate shots while filtering out distracting sounds will be tested to the limit. Rodriguez, now wearing instructor insignia, stepped forward to address the group. Each of you will navigate the course individually, with 30 minutes to complete all 12 engagement areas. Instructors will be monitoring your progress, but you will receive no guidance or assistance during the exercise. This is your test alone. As the recruits prepared for their individual runs through the course, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 months ago, she had been a college graduate with no military experience and no realistic prospect of succeeding in such a demanding program. Tonight, she stood among the top performers in her class, about to attempt the most difficult test of her military career. Sarah's name was called 15th in the rotation, giving her time to observe the performance of other recruits through night vision equipment. She watched Marcus Webb navigate the course with his characteristic precision and confidence, successfully engaging 11 of 12 targets within the time limit. Other recruits struggled with target identification in the darkness, and several failed to complete the course within the prescribed time. When Thompson called her name, Sarah approached the starting point with a calm determination that surprised her. The terrified, fumbling recruit who had missed every shot on her first day had been replaced by someone who understood both the technical and psychological demands of combat marksmanship. Martinez, Thompson said as she checked her equipment one final time. Remember that night operations are about patience as much as accuracy. Don't rush your shots, but don't hesitate when you have positive target identification. Trust your training and your instincts. Sarah nodded and stepped up to the starting line. Around her, the training facility had been transformed into an urban combat zone with building facades, vehicle mock-ups, and realistic terrain features. In the darkness, Even familiar landmarks appeared threatening and alien. The starting signal echoed across the course, and Sarah began moving toward the first engagement area. Almost immediately, the sound system activated, filling the night air with the cacophony of simulated combat, automatic weapons fire, exploding mortars, and the screams of wounded civilians. The audio assault was designed to create confusion and panic, but Sarah had learned to filter out distracting stimuli and focus on the immediate tactical situation. The first target appeared 50 yards ahead, a hostile figure emerging from behind a concrete barrier. Sarah activated her tactical light, acquired the target through her night vision equipment, and fired 2 rounds center mass. Both hits. She moved quickly to the next engagement area, where a more complex scenario awaited. Here, 3 targets were positioned at varying distances and angles, 2 hostiles and 1 civilian. Sarah had to identify which figures represented threats and which were innocents. Then, engage only the appropriate targets while ensuring her shots wouldn't endanger the civilian if they missed their intended marks. She took her time, positively identifying each target before engaging the hostiles with precision shots that left the civilian untouched. As Sarah progressed through the course, she found herself entering a state of focused calm that she had never experienced before. The darkness, noise, and complexity that had seemed overwhelming during the briefing now felt manageable. Each target presentation became a puzzle to be solved methodically, using the skills and knowledge she had developed over weeks of intensive training. The 6th engagement area presented her most challenging scenario yet, a moving target that appeared intermittently from behind cover while civilian targets remained stationary in the foreground. Sarah had to time her shots to coincide with the hostile target's brief appearances while ensuring she didn't inadvertently engage any of the innocents. She missed her first shot as the target disappeared behind cover before she could acquire a clean sight picture. When it reappeared several seconds later, Sarah was ready. She tracked the target's movement, led it appropriately, and fired. Hit. The target dropped immediately, marking a successful engagement. Midway through the course, in the 7th engagement area, Sarah encountered something unexpected. As she approached the designated firing position, she realized that one of the targets was positioned in a location that made positive identification nearly impossible with her current angle of approach. She would need to move to a different position to gain a clear view, but doing so would cost precious time in an exercise where every second mattered. For a moment, she considered taking the shot based on incomplete target identification, a decision that would be faster but potentially catastrophic if she engaged the wrong target. Instead, she remembered Thompson's emphasis on patience and proper procedures. She maneuvered to a position that provided clear target identification, positively identified the figure as hostile, and engaged successfully. The decision to prioritize accuracy over speed proved costly in terms of elapsed time. But Sarah understood that in real-world operations, the consequences of engaging the wrong target were far more serious than the consequences of taking a few extra seconds to make the right decision. As she approached the final engagement areas, Sarah realized that she was performing at a level she had never achieved before. The combination of darkness, stress, and complex target scenarios that should have degraded her performance had instead sharpened her focus and clarity. Each shot felt deliberate and controlled, each movement through the course purposeful and efficient. The 11th engagement area required her to engage targets at varying elevations while positioned on uneven terrain that made stable shooting positions difficult to achieve. Sarah adapted by using available cover and terrain features to create stable firing platforms, demonstrating the kind of tactical flexibility that separated competent marksmen from true professionals. As Sarah approached the final engagement area, she became aware of figures observing from the darkness, Thompson and other instructors who had positioned themselves to watch her complete the course. The realization that her performance was being evaluated by the people who would determine her future in the military police added an extra layer of pressure to an already challenging situation. The 12th and final target scenario was the most complex yet, multiple targets at different ranges and positions, with civilians interspersed among hostiles in a configuration that required extreme precision and careful shot selection. Sarah had to engage 3 hostile targets while avoiding 4 civilian targets, all within a time window that left no room for hesitation or second-guessing. She approached the scenario systematically, identifying and prioritizing targets based on the immediate threat they posed while ensuring she maintained awareness of civilian positions. Her first shot neutralized a hostile target positioned behind partial cover. Her second shot eliminated a threat that had been partially concealed among civilian figures. Her third and final shot completed the engagement, successfully neutralizing all hostile targets while leaving every civilian unharmed. As Sarah completed her final shot and began the movement to the extraction point, she heard Thompson's voice through her radio earpiece. "Outstanding performance, Martinez. Clear the course and report to the debrief area." Walking through the darkness toward the illuminated debrief area, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone over the past 2 months. The woman who emerged from the night operations course bore little resemblance to the uncertain college graduate who had struggled to hit targets at 50 yards. She had become someone capable of making life and death decisions under extreme stress, someone who could be trusted with the responsibility and authority of a military police officer. At the debrief area, Thompson waited with her performance scores. 12 engagements, 11 successful target neutralizations, 0 civilian casualties. Course completed in 27 minutes, he announced. One of the top 3 performances of the evening. But Thompson's evaluation went beyond mere statistics. More importantly, he continued, you demonstrated the kind of tactical decision-making and moral clarity that defines the best military police officers. When you encountered that ambiguous target in the 7th engagement area, you chose to prioritize positive identification over speed. That decision might have cost you a few seconds, but it demonstrated that you understand the true responsibilities of your position. As other recruits completed their runs and the final scores were tallied, Sarah learned that 21 of the 23 qualified shooters had successfully completed the night operations test. She had not only graduated from the program, but had distinguished herself among her peers as someone who combined technical competence with sound tactical judgment. During the informal gathering that followed the official debrief, Rodriguez approached Sarah with a letter that bore her brother's military unit insignia. "Michael wrote this before his final mission," Rodriguez explained. "He asked me to give it to you if you ever followed through on your plan to serve." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the letter and read her brother's final message to her. In his characteristic handwriting, Michael had written about his pride in her determination, his confidence in her ability to make a difference, and his hope that she would find the same sense of purpose and service that had driven him to enlist. The letter concluded with words that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "I know that whatever path you choose in the military, you will serve with honor and distinction. You have the heart of a warrior and the wisdom to use that strength in service of others. I am proud to call you my sister, and I know that the people you serve will be lucky to have you protecting them." As Sarah folded the letter and placed it carefully in her pocket, Thompson approached with her final training evaluation and new duty assignment orders. "Congratulations, Military Police Officer Martinez," he said formally. "Your first duty station will be with the 503rd Military Police Battalion at Fort Bragg, where you will be assigned to a unit that specializes in high-risk detainee operations and convoy security." Looking at her new orders, Sarah realized that her journey from struggling recruit to qualified military police officer was complete, but her real service was just beginning. The skills she had developed and the confidence she had gained during training would now be tested in real-world situations where the targets wouldn't be made of paper and cardboard, and where the consequences of her decisions would affect real lives. But as she stood in the darkness of the training facility, surrounded by her fellow graduates and the instructors who had pushed them all to exceed their own expectations, Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had found her calling in service to others, and she had proven, to herself most of all, that determination and proper guidance could overcome any initial limitation. The girl who had fired and missed every time until the SEAL instructor signaled had become a woman who could be trusted to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, just as her brother had done before her.